Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Roel and Francois.
Hey everybody, welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. It's great to have you here on this new episode. Francois could not make it on this episode. He just got back from the BLPC, so giving him a little rest from traveling, and he'll be back on the next episode. But in this episode, we'll keep it fairly short this week, because what I want to talk about is Wi-Fi and the highly connected classroom. Right, so what does the classroom look like in the future when it comes to Wi-Fi? How are we going to get people connected, all these different devices on the Wi-Fi network, and what technology are we going to be looking at? Are we going to jump into 802.11ax? Are any of you guys using 802.11ac? Well, before we even get to that, I want to take a look at it at a bigger picture here and discuss what it takes to get there, right? When I look at classrooms, and I'm talking about pretty big classrooms here, lecture halls, that type of thing, where you can pack a couple hundred of students there in the room, or at least 100 or so. And when I look at that classroom, I think, okay, there's got to be at least twice as many devices as people, because people usually bring in their laptop, and then they also have their phone, and a lot of times there's people with 3 devices. They got a tablet, and maybe that's what they're taking notes on. You know, they're the super student. But when we think about how these students use the Wi-Fi network in a classroom, are they really using it to its full potential? Are they using it because they need to in the class? And I think that's where the future of the classroom is headed. Is we've got this interactive teaching method that these professors are using in order to get that engagement from each of the students to enhance their learning and be able to become more interactive during that class, during that session. Because a lot of times or how it is now, teachers are telling them to close their laptops, close the lids, right? Or put away your phones, because now they're a distraction. They're distracting from paying attention in the class and actually learning. And so what I have found with one particular professor that I was helping with Wi-Fi is he is implementing this interactive learning, this interactive teaching, where you engage the students in the classroom to utilize their mobile devices or their laptops, and they will go out and research some of this information that is brought to them by the teacher, and whether that's all of them browsing to a particular website. In this case, it's something like PubMed, where they will research specific topics like cancer, for example, and the instructor will give them specific directions on trying to find information, and parts of the class will be split up into different groups and looking up different pieces of educational material. And so you have an environment now where you're getting 100 or a couple hundred students who are actually utilizing the Wi-Fi in that classroom. And so now you really have this high density environment where capacity may become an issue if you haven't built it to capacity of 100 plus devices. And sometimes you have students who are looking this up on their laptop and then using a phone or a mobile device to do other things as well. And I've seen this. I've sat in these classes where I was monitoring the Wi-Fi network, monitoring the spectrum, and the professor told them to go to a website, and I'd see certain spikes, channel utilization spike up, get to a certain point where people download their data. This is mostly text. So they were downloading data from a website, even from, I think, Google Scholar is what it's called, where they were able to get some some articles that only you can get through education. And so if you were looking up a specific topic, then depending on that document, you have about 50 or so devices actually downloading like abstract documents or even PDFs. And so this was a classroom where I had redesigned this classroom because there was one single AP in the back of the room, but the capacity of the actual room itself fit about 200 people, 200 bodies in that room. So right away, I think, okay, there could be possibly 400 devices if you think about the laptop and the mobile device. But the most beneficial, the most people who will get the benefit of that Wi-Fi connection are going to be in the back of the classroom because that's where the AP was mounted. Now, what I did here was I actually created a design from the top where I mounted antennas. They were flush mounted on the ceiling, and they were patch antennas. I want to say about, oh geez, I can't remember because it's been a while since I did this project, but they were directional antennas, and they were meant to fit the capacity of the room. And I wanted to create different cell sizes for different parts of this classroom, and it actually went and worked out pretty well because previously the professor had said that Wi-Fi was not up to par for when students actually were going to browse through these publications online, and it was just mainly text. Now, where it gets interesting is what if they were going to do video, for example? What if the professor told specific sets of students to watch a video, for example? That would actually put a strain on the Wi-Fi network if it was just one AP in the back of the room. And so the process I took in doing this, because this professor came to me and said he was going to do a different teaching method and get these students involved, which meant they were actually going to use technology to learn. And he would instruct them, okay, go look this up, tell me what you find, and he had them go out and do the research. And he calls it this interactive teaching and learning. And so this episode is really about how can we promote this new way of teaching and learning. Well, it's not exactly new, but how can we help promote using technology to enhance the teaching and learning process in these high density classrooms? And it always starts with, getting buy-in, at least with building management, for example. So before I even did an install, I actually met with the building manager because they had really nice lecture rooms, high ceilings, and I knew I needed to mount antennas on the ceiling. I needed to get an AP up there. If I wasn't able to hide the AP, then I needed a way to collocate the AP with the antenna. So prior to the meeting, I had gotten samples of what the equipment would look like if I were to mount it on the ceiling. And that was my primary goal there, was to get this mounted properly, the way I wanted the signal to be propagated. I don't like mounting APs on the wall, especially if they're going to be omnidirectional, but I prefer to have them mounted on the ceiling with a directional antenna, creating a specific cell size there for the lecture room. And that way you have different sections of the classroom associating to specific APs. You've got to have specific configurations to make this happen. And I'll try to touch upon those as well. But getting back to the buy-in, I scheduled a meeting with the building manager. I brought over a co-location mount. And then I also brought over a separate mount just for the antenna. And so I explained that there were professors that wanted better Wi-Fi in the classroom and that they needed this in order to teach the students. And so the students can actually get work done during the class session. And previous attempts, it was slow. Most students weren't able to download anything just because you've got 100 plus devices trying to request airtime, try to use airtime here with a single AP. And so I had to use common language there that the building manager could understand. And so once I got him on the same shared background and purpose about helping teachers or professors instruct these students, he was somewhat on board. And so he saw I was carrying this equipment, and I was telling him, okay, I'm planning to install a specific number of access points on the ceiling. And worst case scenario is we cannot hide the APs. So I have this co-location mount, which will mount on the ceiling. It will not fall and land on a student's head, but it's meant to keep everything organized and compact as much as possible. And plus we have the possibility of directing that signal with the different amount of degrees that we can turn it. And so he was shaking his head, sure that it doesn't look very pretty, but it will do. And then I said, what my perfect goal here is to just actually hide the access point in the ceiling and use an external antenna and just pull that through a small hole in the ceiling, and the antenna would sit flush mount, and the ceiling wasn't at any weird angles. It was a flat ceiling, but it would point the signal directly below to the students, and he felt much more happier with that solution. And there goes my buy-in with the building manager, because then now I can schedule an installer to run the cables and to mount the equipment the way I want to, without somebody actually coming back to me and saying, hey, what is this? Why am I seeing access points? Who installed this, for example? And in some environments, you won't get that, but there are cases where I've run into situations where I have to explain after the fact why this was done, why it was installed, but without notification to anybody. And I think people just really want to know ahead of time what's happening, especially in the buildings that they manage, and to help set expectations, not only for the building manager, but also for the people in that building, so they know there's people who don't normally go into that building, but they will know they are there to improve Wi-Fi. And who doesn't want to get better Wi-Fi, right? So usually when I'm coming in, I'm saying, hey, I'm here to improve Wi-Fi. This is why I'm doing it. You guys will benefit from this. And then they're happy after the fact. So once I have that buy-in, there's the buy-in from the building manager and whoever else needs that buy-in. Your professors will be your biggest buy-in there, because that's what they want. That's what they need. But the next thing that I always consider is the aesthetics. And in part of that conversation that I have with the building manager, and this is usually with the building manager, is I want to find out, okay, do you have any problems with how some of this will appear after we install it? And I give them a couple of options. I say, this is what we will provide to you. This is what we will install in the room. Now, if you don't like the way this looks, or you don't like the way it's going to hang off the ceiling or anything, there are ways to make it aesthetically pleasing. Now, that doesn't mean that's the direction I'm going to go immediately, because it is something that increases the cost of the project. So the way I approach that is, so on my campus that we have funds to install Wi-Fi, and usually if people want something more aesthetically pleasing, they have to pony up that cash to pay for the aesthetics. So I will provide options and say, okay, here are 3 different options and how we can improve the way this blends in with the aesthetics of the building, but here's how much it costs. And I just pass the cost down to them, and they just pay for that portion to make it aesthetically pleasing. Sometimes that they say, okay, let's do it, but other times they won't because it just wasn't budgeted for that year, as an example. But typically, people will agree to the installation that the hardware that I have to mount APs and antennas. But other times, if it's a very nice looking building, then you will have to spend more money on ways to make sure you don't compromise the signal or the quality of your wireless connection there. And so you look for ways to blend it in with the environment, and sometimes you just can't mess up the look and feel of a structure. It's bound to happen. And I know we promote or always suggest placing Wi-Fi closest to the users, but a lot of times or sometimes that's just not possible. And I'm always aware of aesthetics, and because you don't want to be on the wrong side of with the architects, for example. You want to be able to go to them with different options and say, okay, here's what I have, here's what I can do to make this work with your blueprints, your design for the building. But there is a requirement to also have this functional, where we need to have Wi-Fi signal in these areas, and to do this properly, this is what we need to do. And so I always stage that conversation as if I'm on their side. I'm here to make this work with you. I'm not here to go against you and say it's my way or the highway. But there are times where some architects will want to pull away a little bit from your suggestions, but hey, always have them sign a piece of paper that says I did not want to help implement good Wi-Fi. So if there are any issues, it is because it is my ultimate decision to not make that happen. And it's not the exact language I use with these guys, but once you make them sign something or put their name on it because it's going to be tied to them, they tend to step back and be a little bit more accommodating. But other times it can be a challenge. But you don't want to ignore the aesthetics of a building. You do want to try to work with the right people, work with either the architects or the building manager to see what can be done to make sure it blends in nicely. And that's usually always a conversation that could be just a couple of minutes. Some people tend to just say, okay, that makes sense. Let's go with that solution. And other times you're going to be like moving mountains to try to get this to work. And sometimes it's good to try to move some mountains. It's a challenge, but you just don't want to be doing that all the time. But it is our job to make sure that nothing is compromised with the Wi-Fi signal and the quality of Wi-Fi, so that way it can be used in this teaching and learning environment, because that's the purpose here. And so when it comes to that, afterwards, you start with your planning and your design. And just like any other environment, the future of Wi-Fi and this highly connected classroom, you always want to start with the planning. You want to understand what exactly are these students, are the teachers going to be making these students do in the classroom over Wi-Fi? Are they all going to be downloading large CAD files over Wi-Fi? Or are they practicing imaging computers over Wi-Fi? I don't know. It could be a class where this is a good one. There's a class where I had to identify why Wi-Fi was slow for 10 laptops, but they were doing some sort of geo data studies, and the applications they were using were pulling down a lot of data. And so the devices were requesting a lot of airtime, and it was just slow for 10 devices because all 10 of them were trying to download massive amounts of data, and they would open multiple applications that would download a lot of data. And so we had to accommodate them with more than one AP. I had to use directional antennas in this small room and basically isolate certain devices to different APs. But this is an example where you need to talk with the professors or whoever is putting on this class to identify what applications or what traffic patterns are we going to see over Wi-Fi, so we can better come up with a design that actually fits those requirements. And by fitting those requirements, I mean not just putting up one or two APs because that's what you think is going to work. And nowadays, with everyone trying to take advantage of technology and utilizing technology to provide a better experience in the classroom, whatever that may be, sometimes that means using devices that maybe you didn't know was going to be in that classroom, and now maybe it's slowing down the rest of the devices. Maybe you have enabled such a high minimum data rate that the main piece of equipment that the professor is using doesn't support that minimum high data rate. I don't know. That could be a possibility. They could be doing things with IoT, for example. It could be a security class, and they're talking about securing IoT. They could be overutilizing the Wi-Fi network. Maybe it's not to capacity. And so that's where a lot of the planning comes in. I put most of the planning up front so I can identify anything that might come at me, blindside me later after the fact, after I have installed the APs. I want to incorporate that into a design because the biggest challenge in a classroom is really going to be the students bringing in their own devices. So you got this BYOD environment, and so you're probably thinking, well, how do you even design for that? So if you've got some sort of system in place that does fingerprinting or device profiling, you could get an idea of what kind of devices are actually on your network. And if you do this, you could better plan for what kind of BYOD environment you have and cater to that. And there's also the hardest part, which is just maybe walking into that class. I've sat in 2 classes just to understand how these professors use Wi-Fi during their teaching. The next thing with having this highly connected classroom using Wi-Fi is the configuration portion. We got to make sure we understand how our Wi-Fi system works. We have all these tools in place or features in place that will automatically configure your Wi-Fi network. But do we want that to happen? Because does the system know exactly how this high density area, this classroom that needs the capacity for whatever is going to happen in the next class, does that wireless system know what's going to happen? Maybe in the future it will, when it comes to AI and machine learning. Maybe it will know that, but right now we must understand what exactly the knobs do in a Wi-Fi system. We can't just go about changing different settings and thinking, all right, this should work, without knowing what they do, what those ramifications are. And an example is maybe someone in this high density area is disabling MCS rates. Is that going to negatively or positively affect your environment? That you don't know. You have to incorporate that with the planning that you've done, gathering the requirements, and then incorporating that into your design, and then also validating that and making sure it works with the devices that come into the environment. Or maybe you've set you've enabled all the low data rates, but then there actually happens to be an 802.11b device that walks into that classroom and possibly slows down Wi-Fi for the fast devices, the latest devices out there nowadays. Or possibly you've set your data rate so high that maybe there's a lot of retries happening on the network and you just don't know it because you've made this change because that's what people have recommended in the industry, is to start enabling higher data rates. But how does that actually affect your environment? So we have to understand the configuration changes that we're making, because poor configuration choices and poor optimization changes leads to such a poor user experience. And we may not even know that after the fact, maybe days later, because in a campus environment, you hardly get anything from anyone that says, hey, right at this moment, we are witnessing such poor Wi-Fi performance. Can somebody help us? From my perspective, I get that information days later saying, hey, back on Monday, today's Thursday, back on Monday, I had poor Wi-Fi performance in this building. Can you fix it? And I have no historical data to go off of other than this one person telling me it was slow. And so we got to be cautious about the configuration changes we're making, understand how some of these settings work, get some foundational knowledge on controller settings, understand RF, get your CWNP certs, study those, and as you do your designs, you want to incorporate that into your designs and understand, okay, if I make this change, this is what should happen, and validate that either by testing it with different amounts of devices in that same room, or do a validation survey to find out if you've met your design and also your requirements. And then the last thing I want to talk about in the highly connected classroom and on a campus, a lot of times we're stretched thin. I know that's the case for a lot of different educational institutions, but we must have some sort of monitoring in place, and not just your reactive monitoring where you get an email and something says, oh, this AP is down. We need some proactive monitoring, because we work in unlicensed spectrum, and that has a whole slew of issues in itself. We have a BYOD environment, and then you have professors that are trying to conduct these classroom teachings, and students paying for these classes. So there's going to be a point in time where people will start getting frustrated that Wi-Fi is not working. So we need to be able to see what metrics we're getting over Wi-Fi. Are we hitting certain thresholds, and should we know what those thresholds are and act upon it when we get close to those thresholds, instead of after the fact when we've already surpassed them? And we want to get an indication of our overall health of the Wi-Fi network, and maybe possibly looking into the health of different sections of your Wi-Fi network, not just your Wi-Fi network as a whole, but also in different parts of your campus. Maybe there are some lecture halls that are more important than others that really need a lot of attention. So you need to have that monitoring in place. And there's a lot of tools out there, a lot of different applications that can help you do this. You can do this with sensors. You could do this with applications that will monitor everything coming out of your controller. You could use a combination of the two to get an idea of what the controller sees and also what the client sees. But for me, it's a matter of seeing what is the end user experience. So that means looking at it from the client's point of view, and you want to see things like the amount of retries. Are the retries going up? Why are they going up? Or maybe the throughput, the average throughput is so low. Why is that? Because the throughput's not there. It's not enough for whatever the professor needs to do in that classroom. So the monitoring will reveal issues that maybe aren't apparent to the end users. The monitoring will help you be more proactive in these environments. And to me, this is what's key to improving the Wi-Fi in a connected classroom. So you want to get, this is the conclusion now of this episode, but I'm going to recap on some of the things I spoke about. And this is getting buy-in, right? You want to get buy-in from stakeholders that will approve what you're trying to do. You want to get their backing. We don't want to ignore aesthetics because that's important to a lot of people. I know in Wi-Fi, we just want to deploy good Wi-Fi, but usually we'll hit roadblocks with people who want to make sure their buildings look pristine. And so you want to make sure you try to accommodate those and get people on a common understanding of why this needs to happen. And maybe we can bypass some of the aesthetics requirements, and that way you can get better Wi-Fi down to the users. And to make a better Wi-Fi connected classroom, we need to start with planning. We need to start with talking with professors and what they plan to use Wi-Fi for, and then create a design around that, whether that's using a predictive design or doing some sort of AP on a stick to try to get more accurate measurements there. But you need to have a plan and design. No longer can we start guessing at where we should place APs, how many. The more you put in there, the better, which is not the case. Sometimes the more APs you put in there, the worse the RF environment will be, especially if you get co-channel interference or adjacent channel interference. But you want to design or even use predictive, because you can start determining what channel widths you're going to use and what channels your channel plan is going to look like, for example. And that leads into the misconfiguration, because you don't want to assume you can put in a certain amount of APs and use, 160 megahertz channel widths because somebody said you can get gigabit Wi-Fi. And because of the high density environment, you are misled, because now everyone's got to share that piece of the pie. Everyone's got to compete for that airtime, and they're just not going to get those that throughput. So we want to make sure we understand from our design what kind of configuration changes we're going to make, what kind of configuration we're going to put in, and also what or how that affects our environment. And then lastly, we want to include monitoring, better monitoring, something better than SNMP and emails. We need to be more proactive and get a clear understanding of what the health of our wireless environment is, to make better decisions and to ensure that we know that we're delivering the Wi-Fi service that everyone should have. So there you have it. Just a little talk about where I think Wi-Fi in the connected classroom is going, what needs to happen, because we will start seeing 802.11ax. We will start hearing more of the marketing, but to me, it always comes back down to understanding the requirements, planning, and designing properly, and knowing how Wi-Fi works in your environment. And you could make it work with what's out there today. The 802.11ax standard that will become a standard in the future will help enhance our connectivity, but we aren't going to see those clients for a while. So we have to deal with a BYOD environment in the classrooms and assume some of these devices just are going to hold us back a little. And it is our job, our duty, to help educate other people into selecting the right devices. And what I mean by right devices are devices that are not old and devices that are dual band, for example. We should do away with just 2.4 only. That is ridiculous to have nowadays. And because, and I've seen this discussion on LinkedIn. I think it was with Andrew Vanaj's LinkedIn update talking about radios. We need, and standards, we need to stop being backwards compatible, because being backwards compatible is limiting our ability to move forward. If we always got to consider older devices, then we're going to be stuck with mediocre experience. That's just how it's going to be if we have to be backwards compatible. And I understand education. It's going to be a while for anyone to catch up, but we can try to help create that discussion, help people pick the right devices that help move us forward with this technology. Well, might be leading down a rabbit hole there, discussing other things, but there you have it. Wi-Fi in the connected classroom, where it's headed, what we need to look at, and that's from my point of view. If you guys have any questions, head over to the show notes. Go to cleartosend.net/110. You'll see some of my notes there about what I'm talking about. And also, if you want to see some of the resources for the news. And if you haven't already, please do leave us a review on iTunes. Let us know what you think about the podcast. We would greatly appreciate it, because we want to know how we're doing as podcast hosts. Are these topics relevant to you? Do we suck at speaking? I don't know. But let us know with a review on iTunes. You can actually head over to cleartosend.net/iTunes, and that'll get you there. And if you found this episode useful, please do share it with your colleagues. Share it on social media. Send it to whomever you think can benefit from this. And as always, I will see you guys on the next episode.